My name is Jack Hunt. I enlisted in the Army National Guard in June of 1939.
What happened next?
And after 2 years of training, we were notified that we were going to be called to active duty in February of 1941. And we were due to build our unit up to the highest strength possible, to full strength, to go with us to when we were called to duty sometime in 1940. So we immediately, we were in the infantry, and they decided to change us to artillery, low artillery to fire against American planes coming in on a low level, so we could automatic weapons is what we were supposed to have. So we and we could build up. So we were finally called to duty on the 10th of February 1941. We were called to duty, and we spent 15 days in the National Guard Armory in Bemidji, getting all of our uniforms completed and packing up the trucks and packing all of our equipment ready to move. We were moving to the state of California.
So then you moved to California?
And on the 17th of February of 1941, we caught trains out of Bemidji, and they met other trains that were part of the regiment that we were in, and we moved to Camp Hunt, California, down by Riverside, California. We got the trains on a night. It was 30 below zero when we loaded on the trains here at the Union Depot, and we traveled by train straight west, and due to the fact that we had lots of time, why we were sidetracked for anything that had anything that had needed to get any certain point at a certain time. So we were a week on the train. We went out as far as Washington, and then turned south from Washington and went down to Camp Hunt, California, shortly out of Riverside, California. So we spent the summer there, and in the early fall we were ordered to move out of Camp Hunt in California and move north on a convoy, and we went north to the convoy. Those of us in the line had no idea where we were going or how long we'd be gone, so all of our equipment went with us up there. We ended up in the San Francisco area, and Battery H of Bemidji was stationed in an abandoned schoolhouse on the eastern side of San Francisco Bay. We moved into that schoolhouse, that abandoned schoolhouse there, shortly after the 15th of November of that month. And we were packing up, and right shortly before the 1st of February, the 1st of December, we were, they picked up our bolt action rifles and traded them for the new Durand rifle, and prepared us for them, and we got those in shape. And on the 4th day of December 1941, they issued us live ammunition, and which surprised us greatly because we had no reason for need for live ammunition at that particular time. On the 7th of March, my brother Gerald was also in the unit, and he and I decided we would go over to visit San Francisco on Sunday, and we wanted to, above all, we wanted to visit the Joe DiMaggio restaurant and bar that he had there. So we got up early on that morning and caught a city bus and drove over, and we finally got to San Diego, or to Joe DiMaggio's place, and we walked into the door, and the place was a bedlam, and we figured, what is going on here? And then the first thing he said is, "We are at war," he said. "Just a few minutes ago, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we are at war now, and we understand that there may be ships traveling toward here to bomb and to land on the United States. And all soldiers are all military men were returned home to station as soon as possible." So we were there about 5 minutes, and we were back out the door and gone in, and there was a guy standing there with a car, and he says, "Where are you going?" And we said, "Well, we got to get across the bay. Our unit over there." He says, "Get in the car." And we said, "But we don't have any money to pay you." "Get in the car, I'll take you wherever you want to go." "Okay, fine." So we drove down, and we got to the Bay Bridge, and that's as far as he could go. But we stepped out of the Bay Bridge, and there was about that time one of the city buses came by, and we put up our hand, and they stopped, and we said we'd get on, and he says, "Get on, where do you want to go?" So we went across the bay on the bridge and got over to Berkeley. And in Berkeley, why, that's as far as he could go, and we got out of there, and we just stepped out in the road and raised our finger, and the guy says, "Get in wherever you want to go, we'll take you." And he finally took us home to the schoolhouse that we were supposed to be boarding in. This schoolhouse was about 2 blocks from the shipping, where they were building ships over there. They were making aircraft carriers and also line outfits that they could haul people in, and we were to guard them. So fortunately, right next to the schoolhouse there was a big hill, and nothing was on top of the hill, and we had one of our weapons up there. The only weapon we had was an anti-aircraft weapon we had with us, a big one up there, moved that. In addition to that, we had a lot of 50 caliber machine guns, dual machine guns mounted on a stand, and we immediately moved those over into the shipyards, and they built us stands up as high as they could get them inside there so we could protect them in the case of war. We could do them, and they were just happy as could be to see that they did have protection there in the event that the war was to start. Well, we sat there, of course, waiting for the Japs to move in on us, and of course they never did. And finally, they decided during this was in February or in January when the war started, and by spring they moved. I was asked to move back to Camp Hong, California, to join another unit, and they were going to bring in all new recruits, and we were supposed to train those recruits and prepare them for movement overseas as soon as they were ready to engage in combat. well, we shipped them out, and about that time of the war, I decided, well, I'm not getting anywhere this place here, so I would become a pilot. Well, one of the rules to become a pilot was that you had to have permission from your father in order to get approval to become a pilot. So I wrote to my dad and told him what I wanted to do, and he sent me back a letter and said, "Sorry, Jack, I don't want you to be a pilot." He says, "I will not sign it," and he didn't sign that. Shortly after that, I decided, well, I will make another move and see what I could do, and so I applied to go to officer candidate school and try to become an officer in the Army. So I sent in an application, and which was eventually was approved and sent back, and I was sent to Wilmington, North Carolina, to school there for a 16-week school on how to become a second lieutenant. And finally completed my course there and was offered there, but at that time the United States had already had more aircraft in there, and they no longer worried about anybody being run over, being bombed from across them coming in. In other words, we didn't have to worry about anti-aircraft on the ground shooting at small airplanes or big airplanes. And so the day we graduated as officers out of the artillery school, they shipped excuse me, they shipped us to Fort Benning, Georgia, to become infantry officers. And when they had an 8-week school there to become an infantry officer, so that we could go to war with the infantry. At the end of the 8-week period there, I was shipped to a camp in Texas, where they trained infantry soldiers there for movement overseas. So I was assigned there as a second lieutenant, and I spent a year there, and before they finally gave me orders to ship me overseas from there. And from there I discovered I was going to go out into the to the South Pacific. But at that time, of course, most of the war was being more war going on in the South Pacific, because the American troops had already moved into Europe and were moving ahead there. So I got on the train and went over back to San Francisco, and there and caught a ship going over to somewhere over in the South Pacific. Well, after a week on board there, we ended up in Pearl Harbor, and we pulled into Pearl Harbor, and the only man who got off the ship there was the commanding officer, and he went in and spent about 3 hours on board, and then he came back, and we shipped out of there, and we ended up in the Philippine Islands. And I was stationed in the Philippine Islands at this time. So about the third day after I was assigned in there, the colonel called me in and asked me where I wanted, what would I like to do, where would I like to go? And I said, well, Colonel, I said, I've been in this war since it started, and I still haven't fired a shot, and I think it's time that I get up near the front. Okay, fine, thank you, he said. So he says, I'll let you know in a short order. The next day I got orders for him, and I was assigned to a company on the replacement depot there, and I was stationed there and had to stay up there. And there, what we did was, as the troops had enough points to return home, they'd come back through our place and spend about a week there, in which we would get them clean uniforms and dress them up and have them settle down a little from being up on the front lines there in the Philippine Islands. And I did run into a young gentleman who had gone with us back in 1941 to when we went out to Camp Hunt. And so I asked him, I says, what are you doing? Are you still firing that weapon? He said, yes. We said, we have the weapon and we use it for point blank firing at as the Japs start moving through. Why, we'd set that right on a line and have direct fire right into the troops. He said, but he said it was really worked beautiful in that matter, because at that time we didn't have to worry about aircraft anymore, because we had complete command of the air as it was, and you couldn't do that. So I stayed with that unit. Let's see, where did I go from there? Oh yeah, then I finally got enough time to go home. I got enough points where I could go home, and I got on, and the ship was home. They put us on an aircraft carrier that was no longer needed over there, so they had removed the aircraft and the pilots, and they made the ship big enough to haul troops home. So, the only sad part of that trip was when we got us halfway across, for some reason or other, the Navy decided they had to have 2 days in that one spot out in the middle of the ocean for some reason. I have no idea what it was. And we thought we'd be home in time for Christmas, but we didn't make it in time for Christmas. So from there, we finally returned to the United States and landed in San Diego. And from there, I was shipped by train as far as, what's the one in California?
California?
No, in
What, in Minnesota?
in Wisconsin.
Oh, I don't know the forts there. Okay.
Anyway, I was shipped home there, and I was released from duty, at which time I rejoined the National Guard whenever they came back, and I rejoined them and went back in the war.
Now, when you came back, did you have to go back to the Pacific after that again?
No.
Okay, then you were in the Guard.
No, I stayed there. I came back and I joined the Guard, and then yes, and then shortly after that, why, the Korean War started, and the Bemidji unit again was called back to duty, and we were shipped down to Alabama. We down there, and we had duty down there, and I was on duty down there for about 8 months when I got orders to ship overseas from there to go over to Korea to help out in the battle in Korea. And so I did, and this time I flew over. Instead of going by boat, I flew over and landed in Japan, and I was in Japan a week and waiting for assignment to Korea. And shortly after I got there, why, they shipped me to a unit in the north end of Japan, in Hokkaido Island, the farthest point north, and I was assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division, which had just returned from active duty in Korea. And there I dealt with them on and I was signed out as a unit commander there. And it was a rough battle because these kids had just come back from a horrible war over in Korea, and they were in bad shape mentally and physically. And all we did was walk around, and then we give them a pass. And of course, giving them a pass was asking for trouble, but we give them a 3-day pass, and then they come back, and when they did, why then they had to spend a week in the hospital to prepare themselves to go back on active duty. I was there about 3 months longer, and when I got orders to return home, at that time I returned back to the United States, and it was relieved, and I went back into the National Guard from there.
And then you didn't get deployed anyplace else after that? You got to stay home then?
No, I stayed home after that because the war was over.
Now, when you left the Philippines, was there still fighting going on at the time?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
There were fighting at the main island. We were down in Leyte in the southern part of one of the southern islands, and there was no fighting there, but there was fighting up north of, what's the capital there?
I know what you mean, but I can't think of the name.
I can't think of the name. Anyway, they were still fighting up in the Philippines, that island at that time. The Japanese hadn't given up yet at that time entirely, and that was when I had hoped that I would get in there to at least get some battle, but it did not happen.
Did you had no chance then to get on any kind of battle at all because of your assignments?
No.
Well, maybe that was a good thing in a way.
Well, I returned home safely.
Yeah.
Because I did, at that time I had a wife and I had 3 kids at home too.
Oh, sure. Wow. Quite an experience. Jack, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Did that cover it all right? Or?
Yep, it's pretty good history.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. You've earned the respect of everybody. All our World War II veterans did.
We were called again during the Vietnam. Yeah.
The Guard was called again for Vietnam?
The unit was called to duty in Vietnam too.
But did you have to go?
No, we went from Bemidji, we went down to Camp Dothan down in Alabama, and spent a year there. And from there, I got I was down there a year, and I got orders then to go overseas from there.
But you didn't go then?
I didn't go, no.
What happened? Why didn't it happen? Why did you have to go?
When I explained my position that I had 4 kids at home and a wife, and I had already had service left over from when I was back in the World War II, and so they.
Yeah, you did your part.
That's as far as we went. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Jack.
Okay.